Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. Everybody who knows me knows that I'm in the marriage business, in the marriage saving business. And as God has been good to me, He, not I, has saved many, many marriages. I ask God for wisdom. And there's been a lot of couples that have come through my organization. And specifically, Sacred Standards is my kind of favorite place to be right now. Sacred Standards are people who are standing for marital reconciliation while their spouse is cheating on them, divorcing them, or annulling them. And so many of us, specifically Catholics, because there are Protestants in the group as well, have such a difficult time with the annulment process because we all feel or tend to feel like we are being divorced twice, where the Protestants just get their divorce. And so Catholics often feel like I'm being divorced twice, doubly hurt. And so the annulment system is one that I think many have agreed is abused in this century, as so many more annulments are given out than used to be. But I'm here to find out, is that true? Is it that we're just understanding marriage better? Were there changes that took place? What truly is an annulment? Is it Catholic divorce? I think we all know that. No, it's not, even though it's ended up becoming so. So I brought in an expert. I'm so blessed. I got the privilege of meeting Dr. Felix Menendez last year at a retreat in Atlanta for Catholics. Oh my gosh, how do I do this? I know this and then I forget. Catholics for the Restoration of Marriage. And Dr. Menendez spoke there. He is, I'm going to say master's degree in English because in Latin it's STL, Dr. Menendez. What's that mean again? Sacra, what?
Sacre Theologiae Licentiatus. So,
Isn't it sound
yeah,
beautiful when he says it?
licensed in sacred theology with a moral theology in my case.
Which is wonderful. And then also, obviously, he's a Juris Doctor. He's got a JCD, which means his Juris Doctor in canon law. And so canon lawyers are really hard to come by these days. Actually, I didn't even think about asking you this. First of all, thank you so much for coming on to my show. You're priceless. How many canon lawyers are out there? Because it seems like there's so few of you.
Yeah, I wouldn't know a number, but I know that there are not enough.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, it's difficult for dioceses to even find the staff that they need for staffing their tribunals.
Yeah, and you are in fact on the tribunal in Atlanta.
Mm.
And again, when we hear the tribunal, I think none of us really know, what does that mean? Who are they? Is this people? Is this a
Mhm.
machine? So can I start with that question again? I just want to thank you for making time for my viewers and me. Who is on a tribunal? Who gets to be on it? Can anyone get to be on it? Do we have to have so many canon lawyers? Do you have to have priests? Do lay people get to come on? I mean, do you know that answer?
Okay, you want the long version or the short version?
Whichever version you think is best.
Yeah, okay. So, mm, uh, okay, so let's begin. In the beginning, we're Catholic, right? So we do believe that the Lord Jesus gave true power of governance to the apostles.
Mhm.
And that power has been transmitted by the imposition of the hand from the apostles to their successors, and so on, right? So bishops, for us Catholics, are not mere administrator of the spiritual goods, and that's all, right? We do believe that they hold that apostolic power that Christ entrusted his apostles with, meaning bishops have true legislative power, true judicial power, and true executive power. Like, I come from the old world, so the division of powers is not so clear where I come from.
Mhm.
But for you Americans, I love that thing, right? Like any American worth his salt knows that there are three branches of power, right? And for a few months, I was living in DC, and it's beautiful how you even have different buildings, right? So that's the White House, that's executive, that's Congress, and then
It's
that's the little,
legislative, right?
yeah, the judicial, right? So we are the judicial power exercised by feeble men, of course, by poor sinners like myself, who are entrusted by the bishop with the very, very grave responsibility of deciding controversies judicially. In the case of church justice, marriage cases are the biggest chunk. So the biggest part of judicial cases for us are marriage cases, most of the times declarations of nullity. There are also very sad criminal cases or accused, mostly clerics, of having done ugly things, of having perpetrated crimes. And then, I mean, residually, maybe there are other types of cases, but the biggest part of our exercise of justice is with marriages that have been broken. And there are different ministers. It's a court of law. Actually, you know, when I came to the United States, I was in Madrid in the consulate. And I come up to the lady behind the bulletproof glass.
Yeah.
Say, what do you do? She says very seriously, I'm a judge. And she looks at me like, a judge? Yeah, judge for the Catholic Church. She was like, did you go to law school or something? And I was like, excuse me? What? I mean, so when the university was invented, right, in the Middle Ages, you could get 4 degrees: theology, canon law, civil law, and medicine. So I have the oldest degree. I not only went to law school, right? I mean, when law schools were invented, you could get my degree. There were centuries before you could get a degree
the other ones.
in American law, in Georgia law, and in Spanish law and French law, right? And so, yes, we are a court of law. Of course, we're a very poor system. We don't have the means that other systems of law have. We don't have church police. We don't have church jail. We don't have et cetera, et cetera. But judges are real judges. We have notaries who certify the truth of judicial acts. We have advocates. We are lawyers in Latin. Lawyers, advocatus, like in other languages, like Spanish, you say abogado, right? And we have a defender of the bond that must intervene in all cases of declaration of nullity of marriage and declaration of nullity of the ordination too, which is a very interesting figure. I don't know if
I was going to say, yeah, we should talk about that another time. I never even thought of that, right? So on the tribunals, they have a judge. But I've heard, and this is
several.
Okay, several judges. I've heard of some tribunals, and again, these are from people who have, excuse me, worked with those tribunals because their marriage was going through this process, where I know one in a diocese in New England, they have a former Catholic priest who left the priest and was living in a homosexual lifestyle. And it's like, how can you even be on a tribunal if that goes against Catholic teaching? Is stuff like that true? Is that an anomaly? How is that allowed? Who picks the other people that can be on tribunals?
Well, certainly anyone who's living in public sin cannot hold an ecclesiastical office, regardless of which it is, right? So we, don't get me wrong, we are all sinners.
We are all sinners.
We are all sinners. He who is free of sin, may he cast the first stone, right? And then a stone comes by, boom, and then Jesus says, Mom! I like that joke because I love my mother. Mom, it's not about you. You are free of sin. Okay. No, so it's important to distinguish, right, between being personally a sinner, which is a condition that we all have. And that's also something I love about us being Catholic, right? We have confessionals at the doors of our churches, right? It's like, yeah, man, you're coming here we're of the same mud. That's how we are. A different thing is when you are living in a public situation of sin,
Correct.
which can be horrible things like, I don't know, you are the cartel enforcer and everyone knows that you are a professional murderer,
Right.
right? Or maybe something like you in good faith, before you knew any of these things, you got married with someone who had a prior marriage, and and then you converted to Catholicism, and then wow, now we have children, so we kind of separate, right, in common. But at the same time, our situation is irregular, which of course is a very, very different thing. And very likely there are many people who have private sins who are way more guilty, right? And more and more, you say more grave or graver in English, right? More grave.
I think both are accepted actually, but I think
Okay.
graver is accurate.
So for people who are living in public sin, regardless of what are their
What the true sins are, right?
what those, holding ecclesiastical office is not okay. We must enjoy good fame, right? So I certainly don't know about that case you were saying, and I wouldn't judge. Also, I
Yeah.
mean,
So I guess what you're saying is we need to assume the best that
Mhm.
maybe he left because he, as the Catholic Church teaches, it's not a sin to have same-sex attraction, but it's a sin to act on it. So let's just hope that he only has same-sex attraction and that publicly he's not acting on it. And if he is, no one knows. And so we'll give that tribunal benefit of the doubt. You know what I mean? Because we have to. But are there any lay people on tribunals?
Yes. So where I come from is less common, right? In Spain, most of the tribunal jobs, well, not exactly. So notaries are lay people, very commonly, but judges, instructors are mostly priests. But there are differences. I'm very good friends with a couple of women who are judges in Spain now, and two laymen also who are judges as well. Excuse me. So it's becoming more common, but it's certainly way less common than here in the United States, where many, many lay people function as judges and other jobs like defender of the bond, tribunal, promoter of justice. So here in the United States, the church is very different as to Italy or Spain in so many respects. Right? Like for instance, the number of people who work in a parish, I was very surprised the first time I came to the States, and I saw that your average parish has like 10 people in payroll. In Spain, that's unthinkable. Right? Not even cathedrals have that big of a staff.
Wow. What do they usually have? 2, 3 people?
Your average parish in Spain has on payroll the priests, and maybe
A
someone who
secretary.
cleans the church is a part-time. That's it. No
Wow.
secretary, no.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. Right.
Mm.
Well, so
Yeah.
that poses the problem here. So who trains the lay people? You have the degree, they don't.
Mhm.
And there's so many poorly catechized Catholics
Mhm.
these days that how are they able to make a decision in cases like these?
Well, for being a judge and a defender of the bond, you need to be at least a JCL. So you need to have a license in canon law, which is, if I'm not mistaken, at least 5 years of sacred studies, right? So a couple years of theology and 3 years of canon law studies. That's for being a defender and a judge.
Okay.
For being an advocate, you don't need the degree, but you need training. And I mean, that's a must. It's not, when we say lay people, we don't mean people without knowledge. We mean people who are not clerics.
So what kind of training do they get?
You mean to become a judge in
To
an
be on a
ecclesiastical
tribunal.
tribunal?
Yeah,
So
because
to
you said they're
become a,
not judges. I'm still talking about the lay people.
okay, so let's go back.
Because it seems, doctor, that
Uh-huh.
there are, and I know it doesn't seem, I know it's just actually factual. The number of annulments just shot up back in the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
The number of decrees of nullity that were approved, something changed at
Okay.
that time. Maybe
Okay.
that's the better question. So I'll let you answer either one of those. What happened in the
So
60s that made it so easy?
judges can be lay people, defenders of the bond can be lay people, advocates can be lay people. Okay. The only job that is reserved to clerics is presiding of the collegial college of judges. So each case is supposed to be heard by a college of 3 judges, and the presiding judge needs to be a cleric. Okay. And also the head of the tribunal needs to be a cleric, the judicial vicar, it's called, the one who's the chief administrator of justice in the
Yeah.
name of the bishop, that needs to be a priest. But the offices of judging, of defending, and of advocating can be held by lay people like myself. Okay, no problem there. Now, for these jobs, you need to have studies, regardless of whether you're a cleric or a layperson. For instance, a priest who doesn't have a JCL cannot be a judicial vicar. Okay, so these are 2 different things. One is whether you are a cleric or a layperson. Another is whether you have canonical studies or not. Okay, so to get to these jobs in the United States, like in the rest of the Catholic Church, you need to have these degrees. There were dispensations until quite recently. They were fairly common, but what I've heard through the vine is that the Holy See is becoming very, very scarce for giving this dispensation. If you don't have a JCL, at least they will not allow you to be a defender of the bond or a judge.
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood. Someone like me who doesn't have any of that can't be on a tribunal. Has to be someone who has some kind of education in
Correct.
that. Okay,
Correct.
that helps a lot, because I thought that there were lay people who are helping make the decision, but they are lay people, but lay people like you who has the decision-making education and power. Okay. What happened that shot the annulment rates through the roof in the 60s and 70s? What changed?
Well, that I don't think there is an easy answer to that one. It's a very complicated story. And then there is like the official part, the one we all know, and then the inner tabernacle of the conscience that only God knows, right? Ultimately. But for those of you, I'm talking to the viewers, right, who don't know what we're talking about. There were several interventions by the popes in the past lamenting the degradation of marriage that it implies to declare the nullity of every marriage just because. So this is not a secret. This is not a conspiracy of a few that are here, or like we are extreme right conservatives. Nothing like that. I mean, you can just open up the Vatican website, check it out, allocutions of the popes to the Roman Rota, and there are interventions like these saying this is not okay. So, I mean, I'm not a historian. I'm a nobody, really. But let me tell you what I see from my own experience. You probably know Scott Hahn, right? The convert, right?
Yes.
So he has I read that book years ago, Rome Sweet Home, when he explains how he converts to Catholicism mainly through the study of the Catholic thesis on contraception. Right? So it's probably the most outrageous thing for non-Catholics, and it was what made him become Catholic. Like he was saying, wow, this is the, because he has this Protestant mindset, he's about being biblical. You're not going to be biblical, right? And he goes like, well, this is the most biblical level, right? Being, right? And then he had this point of radicality, if you want, right? Like he didn't even like the um, the solution proposed by Paul VI of recurring to the natural cycles of female fertility. He says, no, 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 you got to be open to life, right? And then there is a point when he says, well, there is a wisdom there, right? Like the church is a mother and understands. In this sense, I think we need to be balanced. Right? On the one hand, it is not possible, and I think it's the point you're making, it is not possible that all marriages are invalid. That is absurd, right? I mean, if all marriages are invalid, that means either we're all stupid or we're all incapable or there is something wrong with us, because marriage is a very basic human right. And it's a very basic human right because it's something that a normally developed human is able to do very early in life. Right? Able to do doesn't mean that this person is in the perfect disposition to lead a wonderful, happy, and holy marriage. It means that from a relatively early age, we are minimally able to understand what marriage is and choose marriage, therefore establishing that covenant, that contract that we call marriage. Right? And when I say we, I don't mean we Catholics. I mean we humans, because marriage is not a Catholic invention. Right? There was marriage before Jesus. Actually, Jesus begins his ministry in a wedding, right? Because marriage was already there.
And the book of Revelation ends in a wedding, and Genesis starts in a wedding. So people need to pay attention to.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's one extreme, right, that we need to avoid. And that's probably the one that affects the majority, or how to put it, that extreme is probably the one that has a bigger bearing in the life of the church, right? Being too lax into thinking that any marriage may be declared invalid. And that's why the popes complained about it, right? The other extreme is like no marriage is invalid, right? Like, and that is also impossible, because marriage at the end of the day is an agreement between a man and a woman to have sexual intercourse and to procreate the children that are born out of those sexual relations. So because it is a contract, because it is an agreement between two human wills, like any other contract, it can be null, it can be invalid. To give an example, you can, I don't know, someone puts a roofie in your drink and you go and you purchase a Porsche, right, that you cannot even buy. And then you go to the judge and you say, the guy who sold me this is a crook. Look at the security cameras. I'm jumping on the tables. I am all over the place. I was crazy. Declare the nullity of that sale, of that purchase agreement.
I think the biggest one I think about all the time are like the Muslim men who are like 50 years old, and they say that they can legally marry a 9-year-old. And we would say that a 9-year-old is incapable of consenting. So that's an easy way to say that's invalid.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But there's so many. And I had also heard, and here's where you need to correct me, that America is, I think, something like 7% or 2% of the world's marriages, and yet they're 95% of the world's annulments. And so why are they coming out of America? What is America doing differently when the word Catholic is the whole world? Is that true, or is that a statistic I'm wrong on?
I wouldn't know. I'm sorry. I don't know about that.
That's okay.
All I can tell you is that when I was studying canon law in Spain back in the day, I have in my class notes a footnote about the United States, like being famous for its laxity in addressing marriage cases, and that's all I know. I don't know percentages. Actually, we were talking before about it. There used to be more comprehensive data on the United States activity of the tribunals, but since a while ago, we don't have it anymore.
Yeah, because and so if we don't, or if the data just stopped being collected a couple years ago, we don't know. But I had also heard that people who appeal their American um, decrees of nullity to Rome,
Mhm.
nearly all of them get overturned, which I've met several people who are like, yep, I appealed to Rome, it got overturned. I'm still legally married, which would
Oh,
seem true. That, okay,
okay.
maybe Rome is looking at America going, you guys gave another one. And so I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but these are the things that people on my side are looking at going, we need to make this madness stop. Either way, we need to stop this. So I don't know, what are we to do? I heard a speaker say yesterday, and I don't agree. They said, we're not giving too many annulments, we're giving too many marriages. Well, if it's a Catholic
Yeah.
marriage and they've met with a Catholic priest, I don't find that a fair statement. So what are we to do? What would you suggest doing to fix this problem? Because you're reading the
Hmm.
stories, right? You're reading what people are saying. And I've read many of them myself because people forward me their decrees. I'm like, this looks doctored up. Anybody can lie. Anybody can say, I was abused. Oh, the time he pushed me into the wall, we find out that, she's actually pushing him and then he grabs her wrists to stop her and see how abusive it is. And then you see the decrees of
Yeah.
nullity. Oh, because they were
Hmm.
incapable of knowing what love was. And it's like, this just seems like a bunch of BS that a lot of people have learned how to work the annulment system. And so they put the words that they're supposed to put on there. What are your thoughts on any of this? Because again, you read all these papers, you
Hmm.
see what claims people are making. And in the end, we're going to go towards what can people do differently. That's where I'm going to lead this towards. But I'm kind of hitting hard with the negative stuff right away. Sorry. Thank you.
I mean, go for it, Christine. I think the work you do in favor of marriage is beautiful. I was very blessed to be in that retreat you were talking about.
Yeah, it
And
was
I
incredible.
also felt so happy to be, I think it was mutual, right? Like the people who
Yeah,
attended that meeting, and for your viewers, that this was a meeting of people who are in many cases hurt by the activity of the church. And I'm not talking about guilt, that the fact is that they
correct.
feel hurt by a declaration of nullity being granted on their case and they feeling that is unfair. So, I mean, Pope Francis, who just died, right, told us to go to the peripheries, to those who suffer, to, well, this is a big, important part of our faithful who are
Yeah,
suffering, and they
yeah.
deserve our love and our care. Now, again, you asked awesome questions. They are they are very big. I think we are so a big question deserves a big answer. Right? I think we are undergoing the gravest crisis in the history of the institution of marriage.
Yes.
And without understanding that, you cannot understand one little epitome or one little symptom, which is the activity of the tribunals in a given country, right? Of the
Correct.
Catholic Church. So since the pill appears, right, everything changes, right? So even Pope Benedict wrote that piece on the true origin of the child abuse crisis, saying that the origin is the secularization and the sexual revolution that brought that secularization along, right? So for centuries, for millennia, right, for a long time before Christ incarnates and brings the gospel to the world, if you had intercourse, pregnancy was in the very near horizon. Right? So it was very easy for any mother, right? So for your grandma and my grandma, right? If they see their daughters or their nieces fooling around, to say, hey, don't do that. Don't do that, because you can get pregnant and you can suffer. I mean, look at Auntie who died last winter of hunger, right? With her baby hanging from her neck. So it was very, and it still is, by the way, in I don't know the majority, but at least a big chunk of the world, the truth that
Sex creates.
you need to be extremely careful for very practical reasons with sexuality, right? Sexuality is dangerous, right? Not in vain, the sixth commandment, and here I'm drawing from my moral theology background, the sixth commandment is the only commandment where there is not parity of matter. There is no small matter. So maybe the guilt, the engagement of the will is not enough. Of course, there are venial sins in the sixth commandment, but there is no minor matter. Why? Because sexuality, it's so deep. It goes to the very root of life, right? When you're playing with sexuality, you're playing with fire, right? People come out of sexuality. So you got to be very careful. And that is the history of the world for millennia. And suddenly there is a technology that appears that, and then they would say, oh, right. But there was contraception before the pill. Yeah, but no. There was not a thing that is safe to take, that is not very complicated, that works mostly, and that you can purchase for a very minimal price, right? That is something new. That is what has changed the world. And let's be honest, ever since the sexual revolution, we are going around, like, I mean, the humanity, right? Or maybe more than the humanity, the Western world, right? Like a chicken with a headless chicken, you know, trying to find an answer. How do we organize this, right? We had the hippies. The hippies didn't work, right?
Right.
But still, I mean, we see the collapse of this traditional family, the collapse of family. I mean, the collapse of institutions, the collapse of authority, of trust, of communities, of societies, which are crumbling down because the very heart of a society is this covenant, that mutual public in the sense that it's done in front of the community, but very private as well because it's intimate, that agreement between a man and a woman who made that commitment, who have been doing this commitment since before we have memory, right? Since before we remember, right? Men and women have been agreeing, okay, so you want to have sex with me, okay, but you got to promise me in front of the tribe that you're going to take care of me. So if a bear comes, you go and fight the bear. If other men come and try to rape me, you're going to fight, okay? And I'm going to be faithful to you. So you're not going to be spending your resources on raising other children. I know this sounds very foreign to our mentality,
but it actually is good.
True. Yes. And it still is for most people throughout the world. And of course, for all our ancestors, right? So I know we are all very modern and very cool now, but I always say destination weddings of people who have been living together for 10 years in the Riviera Maya are the French experience.
Yeah.
This is totally new, okay? Until yesterday, right? And yesterday is until people who we all know or knew alive in our lifetimes, if you wanted to have sex with someone, you had to marry. That's how it works. But then this technology appears and disrupts everything. So the world is shaking because this covenant that is at the heart of the societal contract, right? I think the true social contract is not what Hobbes and all these people propose. I think the social contract is this thing, right? The social contract is when we pass from the jungle to living in actual societies, this is the new thing, right? This is the real thing. This is the real contract. This is the real agreement that holds society together. We Catholics always have defended that the basis, the basic cell of society is not the state, is the family, right? It's that agreement between a man and a woman that creates a family. So all these big answer, okay.
No, I appreciate it.
To say that
because they all come together.
The problem with what you guys are experiencing, and you guys, I'm talking to people of your sensibility that feel hurt because we, diocesan judges, are giving annulments away like candy. I mean, there is a frame where this needs to be understood. So something happened, and everyone is trying to give out a response. For instance, young priest comes out of seminary, very pious priest. He's been studying the gospel for long, long years, for many hours every day. And you know who speaks a lot about about the devil and about hell? Jesus. So he goes to his first parish, begins to preach, and immediately people come to the sacristy and say, "Hey, you're making us afraid. Why are you preaching about hell and devil and all the time? I mean, we don't like this. This used to be like that when I was younger. I don't like this anymore. I'm going to
Right.
complain to the bishop."
Which is
And
true.
even if the bishop is a good bishop and on the one hand tells the priest to hold his horses and all the other hand he says, but it's true. I mean, what you're preaching is the true gospel of Christ. Even in that case, you self-censor, right? So next time you want to say the word devil or Satan, you be careful, because I know some people are going to come and complain. So there is a lot of that. There is a lot of what is that they say? The trees impede you from seeing the woods, right? So the forest, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, some people see the forest and some
So
people just
which
see
is
the tree.
understandable. There are bleeding situations, right? People who got into marriages that were a horrible situation. People who are living in a public sin situation where joined just naturally or in a civil marriage, which for the Catholic Church is not a true marriage if either party is Catholic. And our good heart, our motherly or fatherly love, the instinct is to come and help. Okay, can I do anything I can to take you out of that situation? And that's a good thing. And I'm thinking of abused women, abused men. I mean, here we have some very serious cases. I've heard cases of abduction, women who were abducted by a man and compelled to marry a man, women who were compelled to marry a man twice her age when they were very young.
But if they
So
were compelled in those cases, those are the easy ones.
yeah, yes, certainly. So you see a lot of trouble. Another vector here is that we live in a society of very sick people, mentally speaking, right? I mean, our modern world, all these screens, cameras, lights, all that, we are all crazy. As a friend of mine said a long time ago, I think I'm the only one of all my friends that has never taken pills. Like, we are in a world of anxiety, of depression, of addiction. What's the levels of addiction in the United
Yeah, they're
States,
incredible.
right? So we live in a sick society, mentally speaking, and that has an influence on the validity of marriage too. So on the one hand, I would say it's understandable that a good pastor wants to solve a problem, right? So you see a person that is suffering because they feel they cannot receive communion. By the way, another big difference between the United States and Spain. Here we go so orderly to receive communion that if you like, there are even people there telling you now you, now you, now you. To me, now I'm used to it because I've been living here for almost a decade. But when I arrived, it was like if one Sunday I was not prepared because I hadn't been to confession, I felt like a leper. My goodness, everyone is gonna know that I am a sinner, right? In
Yeah.
Spain, it's not like that. You walk up. Some people like going in the beginning. Some people prefer waiting until the end. So you don't really know who can and
Yeah,
can't
that's
receive
true. That's
communion.
true.
if I had some power, that would be something that I would forbid, the orderly communion. I would let people go and make a mess out of it so that
Yeah, I lived in
privacy is
Italy, and you're
protected,
right. It's
right?
Go ahead.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, what I was going to say is that on the one hand, please be understanding, right? The majority of people demand from us, right, that we give annulments, right? The majority, the demand, if you want, okay, this is America, so I can speak in sales terms, right? The demand for the supply is, hey, give me an annulment, solve my problem, right? Also, the mentality here is even among Catholics is very Protestant in this sense, right? Like going to church as getting some services. That's something that was also a big surprise to me when I came to the country. On the other hand, once you get into the thick of the cases, you realize that many times you are not helping anybody by giving an annulment, right? Like, for instance, a man betrays his wife, goes away with a 10-year younger secretary, and on top of that, requests the church for an annulment, and we rubber stamp that. And back in the day, in the old code, um, guilty parties could not petition for an annulment. So, for instance,
That's
exclusion of
wonderful.
children.
When did that change?
Yeah, again, it's wonderful, but then I think there is always like a tension between the particular case and how that particular case entices you to come down, to be merciful, to be understanding, and the need of the majority, right? With so many things, I think we've experienced that so much in the church. Like, what is the right approach? You make a very clear rule that everyone needs to obey, or you attend the need of this particular case that is bleeding. Oh, this poor person, wow, is suffering so much because the law. I mean, as a jurist, of course, I am more than no. A good government needs to consider the good of the whole. If you start making exceptions for everybody, you're gonna end having a failing society. But easier said than done, I'm not in charge.
Right.
So it's very easy for me to say. So in summary, I don't think we should be led by whether this it is good to give annulments or it is bad to give annulments. What we as judges need to do with a right conscience is study each case, and before God, who will judge me in the last day, give the vote to the best of my ability, very conscious that I am a miserable human being and that I make mistakes all the time. So with humility, saying, well, I think that this particular case has reached the degree of certainty for me to declare the nullity. That's it. I mean, statistics make sense, right? I always say when we speak about the statistics that it's like in a casino. So if you go to a casino, you may walk out rich or poor, or you may lose everything or earn a little. Right. But if you go 1,000,000 times to a casino, we know exactly how much money you're going to make, right? Because
you mean how much you're going to lose?
Yeah, good point.
1,000,000 times you're going to come out losing. Yeah,
exactly. But my point is that humans individually are unpredictable. Humans in bulk are very predictable. Correct. So if an ecclesiastical tribunal has 100% affirmative cases, something
is wrong.
Must be wrong there. If they have 0% affirmative sentences, also something must be wrong. Let's keep in mind that these percentages don't refer to the totality of marriages, but to the marriages that had been analyzed by an advocate and then proposed to the judgment of the tribunal and then judged. So it's not saying that if we give 75% annulments, we believe that 75% of marriages are invalid. That's not what it means. It's 75% of the
Of
cases
the
that
ones
are
that got to your
proposed.
table,
There you
right?
go.
Yeah, but even so, well, anyway,
Mhm.
that's a different question there.
Mhm.
But it still seems, if we look at the ones that you mentioned earlier, someone was literally had a gun to their head, right?
Mhm.
But it seems that most of them are not like that. I listened to a priest give a talk, and when the data were still collected, and this was within the past 10 years, and
Mhm.
he said, you look at the data of all the dioceses and what percent of annulments they are approving, and you put them in order. He said you'd have to go down 48 dioceses before you found one that wasn't giving 100%. And so
Oh.
even though what you
Oh.
say is, yes, which ones are not making their table, it still doesn't seem that many dioceses should never find one that isn't a valid marriage. And so that takes me to my next question. When you and I talked before we went online, it is the clause 1095.2, the one that says a grave defect of discretion of judgment. I have seen that used on every single one of them that comes through. You almost never see anything else. And I think of one case, a husband and a wife, they had nearly 10 children. I don't want to say the number because I don't want anyone to know who I'm talking about. Nearly 10 children. They went to pre-Cana class. They went to engaged encounter. They had both college degrees. They were both raised in Catholic families. They taught pre-Cana for a time on marriage. And then to come out and say, yeah, and that was used. Grave defect of discretion. And I said, if they had grave defect, then who could have
Who
any?
doesn't?
Jesus is the only one that could have
And he
better
was
judgment.
celibate. And he was.
Exactly. And I'm going, this is just so wrong. So I look at the person. I'm not going to say if it's the husband or the wife that's, in the group, but the spouse that was left behind is like, we couldn't have done anything better. And those are the people that are just so offended. Granted, it was not in the Atlanta diocese where you are, so you can't answer for it. But that comes past me again and again and again and again and again. All these people that did everything right. And it seems like there's no answer for the people who are victimized by those. That nothing they can say. They can say, my spouse was very mature. My spouse had good judgment. But they just seem, right? I'm just speaking out of opinion and passion, that the person who gets to file for the annulment always wins, that the other person, the one who's trying to defend and say, no, we had a valid marriage, that they almost always seem to be the ones to lose. It seems that there's not, in the vast majority of tribunals, an actual attempt to get the perspectives of both people. And before you answer, I've also had the people who have had these paperwork, and then the tribunal says, you can't get copies. You can't get copies. And maybe you can come read it, but you can't write notes. You can come look at it. Who's got a memory like that? I'm 60, you're young. You can remember stuff. It just seems like the system is designed to appeal to the person who wants to dissolve the marriage and to hurt the person who wants to fight for it. There's not a specific question in there other than, is that right? Is that wrong? Should there be an answer for that? What can people do? I know I'm giving you big questions all the time, but it's out of this frustration. What
Of
are these
course it
people to
is.
do?
Of course it is. No, and let me say it very clearly, for you and for everyone who may be listening or are in these situations, the church understands. Okay, the church is not her children. The church is not every single person, right? The church was not harming children when priests were doing despicable actions, right? That was,
Right.
of
It
course,
wasn't
it
the
was
church,
the
it was
son of
some
the
bad
church who
priests.
was doing that,
Right.
but um, we are sancta et meretrix. Meretrix, I don't know if we can say this on
Say that
YouTube.
again. What did you just say?
Sancta et meretrix. It's
Okay, so that's
St.
Latin.
Augustine's quote
Okay.
it's a very famous thing that is quoted very often. Sancta is holy, and meretrix is the word that I don't know if you have meretriz or meretrix in English, but it's a prostitute. And St. Augustine says that about the church, right?
A
Saint,
prostitute?
yeah,
So
Saint,
holy prostitute.
no. Holy in her foundation, in her head, which is our Lord Jesus Christ, but in her members, she's a sinner, right?
Okay.
And that's you and I. I'm sure you have things that you regret.
Oh, horrible sins.
And was the church doing that? No, it was me. You know, this poor me, who I'm a loser and I'm a moron and I am who I am, right?
Yeah.
Only the glory is only to God. Yeah. The only one, Jesus and his blessed mother, were nobodies, right? Let me say, the thing with not being able to get copies, that's in the law. I mean, that has always been like that. That's part of how the canonical process works.
That you're
No
not
one,
supposed to get copies, or you are?
yeah, no one gets a copy. We're very, very respectful of privacy. Parties have the right to know the papers, to read them at the tribunal, etc. The lawyers can even get copies, but under a severe penalty not to share them with anyone. Only the decision is published to the parties. So the sentence in which the reasoning of the judges is explained. But the declarations of the parties, documents, all that is kept in secret from society because it's extremely private also. I mean, like the things that we
the
deal
details
with
that people have to
in
write.
this,
Yeah.
I always say that. I mean, that the most delicate information in the whole chancery is what we have here. I mean, it's not finance, it's not human resources, it's the Metropolitan Tribunal. I mean, the stuff here about betrayal, disease, mental problems, abuse, sexuality, right? I always say this, like if you cannot stomach this job is not for you. I mean, this job, working in an ecclesiastical tribunal, is for the chaste, certainly, but not for the prude. I mean, we're going to be talking
Correct.
the
My job
worst
either.
stuff
I've heard the
all day.
craziest things. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I think I got lost. Where were we?
Well, so I was saying how people who
Mhm.
really want to fight for this, they're always given the excuse, the defect, discretion of judgment, and you get this holiest of people.
For those who want to know what the ground really is, may I quote my book? So you can check my videos online. We can share the link.
We're going to make sure that, so Dr. Menendez has a YouTube page I want you to go to. He's very good. And a book. You said your book called?
My doctoral dissertation. If you read that, that's good if you have insomnia. That's gonna help you out.
I have one of those as well, which is really funny for my computer right now. I have my doctoral dissertation underneath my computer holding it. That's what it's good for.
Probably the best use of a doctoral dissertation. Best use. Yeah. Well, I am right now working on a website that I am gonna launch real soon. We can share the link to when it comes out. But
which the link, because he doesn't have the website yet, is not yet attached to this video. But when he does get the link, if you're watching this video at a later date, I will attach it to this show. So depending on when you're watching it, go check below for the link. But otherwise, if you do want to get a hold of Dr. Menendez, you are going to see his YouTube channel. We agreed beforehand to just make your comments on the videos there if you want to reach out to him, and you can interact that way for now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't get many views. So if you comment,
you will now. Be ready.
So yeah, so there are these. Okay.
So we're not the church is perfect, but the church's members are not perfect. So I think you're probably saying you can't defend the people
what my fellow judges do. That's what I want to say. I mean, like I'm sure I've made so many decisions that are wrong in my life, right? Like things that I mean, we're very limited. That's why we have 3 judges in every case, right? And many times we disagree. I mean, disagreement is very common. Another thing I used to say is, if you don't know how to be defeated, find a different job. I mean, here we disagree for a living. This is a court of law. We do controversies all the time. I may think that this marriage is invalid, and the judge in front of me says no, and This is part of how we do. That's why we have appeals, right? We have different instances where a superior tribunal reviews what we did, and that tribunal is composed also of fallible men. It's not like because it goes to the Rota auditors are also human beings. The dean of the Roman Rota was in my doctoral dissertations tribunal. I know him quite well. He was my professor. And one of the, let me brag a bit, a little
Go
bit.
ahead.
I'll go to confession. I got a 10 out of 10 in my doctoral dissertation.
Nice.
So I am able to say that the dean of the Roman Rota gave a 10 to my doctoral dissertation.
That's awesome.
So,
and the Roman Rota, for those that don't know, it's kind of like the Supreme Court, right? It's the final place.
The Supreme Court is the Signatura Apostolica. The Roman Rota is the ordinary tribunal of the supreme authority. So the Pope's ordinary court of law is the Roman Rota. And the Supreme Tribunal, in the sense of the ultimate appeal, is the Signatura Apostolica, which also functions as our Department of Justice. So it has an oversight of all the tribunals in the world.
Wow.
Okay, so we were talking the grounds of incapacity, right?
Yeah, so, defect. What are some of the things that would say that someone's got a defect of discretion of judgment? Because if I've got so many
that's not that complicated, actually. Okay. So marriage is made by consent. Okay, marriage is a contract, an agreement. A man and a woman say, do you want to be my husband? Yes. Do you want to be my wife? Yes. I accept you as my husband. I accept you as my wife. That's a marriage. Okay. For Catholics, that marriage in the Council of Trent needs to be performed in the canonical form, that is in front of a priest and two witnesses, right? A priest that is the one that has jurisdiction on the place, etc. Then traditionally there were 12 impediments, right? So ecclesiastical laws that make a marriage invalid. For instance, a priest, even if he's a young, healthy guy, naturally able of marriage by ecclesiastical law, even if he exchanges the consent with a woman, that is not a valid marriage. Right. You were referring before to the very young person. The impediment of age is also a very old one, right? So the impediment of age is women under 14, men under 16. Doesn't matter what the customs of your country or place, whatever are. Doesn't matter how mature you are. You cannot marry. Doesn't matter. At that age, we just make it invalid by law. Right? So you have the canonical form, the impediments, and then the defects of consent. Those are the three things that can make a marriage invalid. Okay? In the defects of consent, okay, because consent is an act of the will. The will, that capacity that we have to tend to things rationally, right? So we share with animals our instinct, our emotions. Right? That's why dogs can be depressed, right? But dogs cannot have an existential crisis, right? A dog cannot tell a joke.
There are some dog owners that think their dogs do. They're doggy psychologists. I'm like, okay.
They can be playful, right? But they cannot
ponder the
do
future.
Abstraction. Exactly, right? So we share with animals that way of taking in the world that we can call senses, and we share with animals that tendency to the world that we call emotion. But we share with God and with the angels that ability to take in the world intellectually. That's what we call the logos, the reason, right? So we participate in the divine nature because we're able to take the world in a different way that we call intellect, intus legere, read inside. And we also tend to the world in that reasonable way that we call will, voluntas. Voluntary is that Aquinas calls it the rational appetite. It is an appetite, a tendency towards the outside world that is reasonable, that is logical, that has logos, that participates in the word, right? That created the universe, right? In that rationality that this underlies the world. So when we do that, when we make a rational choice, an act of election, right? We're acting humanly, right? That's what we call the human act, as opposed to the act of the human. Aquinas begins his distinction, his treatise on ethics with this distinction, right? Some of your actions are human actions because you engage your human capacity of intellect and will. But some of your acts are just acts of a human, like scratching, like turning around, sneezing in your sleep.
Yeah.
So, for instance, a mother who suffocates a baby in her sleep, right, is not a murderer, right? She has perpetrated manslaughter, so a human has died out of those actions, but she's not responsible for those actions. She didn't do them on purpose. They were not voluntary, right? So marriage is always a voluntary act of the will. It's a consent, right? Exchange consents of a man and a woman. When those consents are exchanged, therefore, they can have essential problems, basic problems that don't render them insufficient for creating the marriage. The first one is that they are not capable, right? That there are not real human actions, but acts of the human. And the most basic, the one we've known throughout history for a long, long time, under the traditional ground of amentia, or lack of mens, lack of reason, is to the person who's drunk at the wedding.
Yeah.
Someone who's so drunk they don't know what they are doing. Well, even if they say, I will, yes, I will, that is not a valid consent, right? Because they are not compos sui. They are not
they're not capable of giving a logical decision at that point.
So the church has always had a ground of incapacity. And by the way, this applies for many other things, right? Like in canon law, this ground of lack of sufficient use of reason appears for other things that you need to have. Like, I don't know, like now they are in the conclave, right? They're going to be in the conclave next week or the week after.
Yeah, I think March 7th.
So if a cardinal in the middle has a Caesar, right, and is not and votes during the Caesar, that vote would be invalid, right? Because he's not really voting. He's doing the external actions of voting, but voting implies choosing someone. And by the way, they do it in a beautiful way, in front of the fresco of the final judgment. So in front of Christ, who will judge me on the last day, I cast my vote. So in the 50s, because we develop a deeper understanding of the human psychology, in the 50s of the 1900s, of course, we begin the tradition of the church, the jurisprudence of the church begins to understand that there is more to incapacity than just the most radical
obvious
cases,
ones,
right? That, well, there are some times in which you may have a psychological anomaly, depression, anxiety, bipolar, whatever the anomaly is, right? An anomalous state of conscience that impacts maybe not all your capacities. Not like when you're high or drunk that you are unable to do any kind of
decision making,
contract or consent.
Yeah.
But that impedes you particularly for this, right? And that is what grave defect of discretion of judgment is. It's a grave defect. So it's not any defect. We all experience defect only God has perfect understanding of things, right? We're humans, we're limited, and our understanding is very limited. But those limitations may be very, very grave, or maybe somewhat grave, right? So the somewhat grave we all experience all the time. We all have to make decisions with limited information. But when it comes to marriage, sometimes people decide to marry out of an anomaly, or moved by an anomaly, or substantially impaired by that psychological anomaly, right? And that is something that really happens in life. Right? Like, for instance, let me give you a hypothetical, right? So imagine this immigrant like myself, right? You arrive in the United States. This is the place where we go with the car everywhere, right? It's so difficult to make friends, right? You either go to church or you join a club or something like that. Otherwise, it's not like in Spain that people walk on the streets and we are making friends all the time. And we're very sociable, we Latinos, right? So for us Hispanics, having friends is so important. We're not like Russians or Germans, right? We need we need human warmth. So I arrive here and I work at a Chinese restaurant where everyone speaks Mandarin, cleaning dishes 14 hours a day. And I am dying inside. I am experiencing a depression, right? If I cannot afford a doctor, but I really am undergoing a horrible, clinically diagnosable depression. And then I use Facebook to get in contact with the people back home. And this girl that I never really liked, and I was never really into from back home, starts paying attention to me. And then I begin like expecting everything from her. And oh, if I am able to be with her, all my problems would go away. I am not thinking rationally, right? That decision making is substantially impaired. There is something very, very wrong with that thinking, right? I am not really free in my decision. I am immersed in a situation that is altering my brain, so to say. And that is not like a minor little thing. It's not like, oh, I didn't notice you snore. No, no, this is something
Right.
very deep. If it wasn't because I am heavily depressed, it wasn't because I am anxious and in a situation of suffering, this would have never even crossed my mind to marry this person, right? And by the way, it happens that when these two get married, the if not the minutes, very soon afterwards, they regret it, right? And say, what did I do? Right. So this ground can impact more directly the intellect or maybe the will. So some people may be very anxious and they feel compelled out of to force someone to marry them or something like that. And then the other ground of incapacity is the incapacity to assume, right? Which doesn't impact your understanding of the essential elements of marriage, of the essential obligations. It impacts your ability to fulfill the essential obligations. Right? For instance, it's very typical cases of homosexuality, right? People who marry for whatever reason, right? Because they are not aware of their attraction for the same sex, or they're not fully aware, and that happens. So they choose to marry because they go along with the moves, or maybe because they have a grandmother who would be very sad if I don't marry. I've seen those cases, right? And then it's not just that, hey, I may be homosexual, but I am un marido cumplidor, I am a good husband. And those cases happen, right? People who feel the attraction, but regardless, I want to be a good spouse to this person. And they are. And they are. I've seen
Yeah,
that.
me too.
But sometimes the homosexuality is so deeply rooted that even if they want, they are unable. They are really unable. They are unable to pay the conjugal debt. So they are unable to have normal intercourse with their spouses. Many times they are unable to be faithful, right? That happens, that I've seen.
Yeah, but being faithful doesn't
Mhm.
affect the marriage bond unless you're not faithful before you marry or plan to not be faithful. If I plan to be faithful and then I marry you and then I'm unfaithful, that's
So
different.
being unfaithful de facto doesn't affect the validity of the marriage, you're right. But being incapable to be faithful does affect the validity of the marriage.
But that's a cop out. I don't think
No,
there's
no.
anyone that's incapable of being faithful. It seems like it's a twist of
Oh,
words.
sweetie. Oh,
Come on, let's
sweetie.
talk.
Oh,
Let's
yes.
talk.
No, no, I mean, absolutely.
It
Actually,
just
this
seems
is,
like it's like, I'm a sinner.
no, no,
I'm
this is how these
incapable.
grounds started. Actually, with this deep, very grave psychosexual pathologies. Of course, what I'm saying is not you're probably thinking of the everyday person who, oh, I like what,
Okay, so
no,
you're thinking
no.
of like a rare
I'm talking
person.
about someone, yeah, these things always begin with the most outrageous cases, and then those cases bring something up, and then we understand, oh, okay, so this is more common than we thought. So I'm not saying that a womanizer, because I've developed this ability to flirt with girls and get women into bed, then that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are cases of very deep pathologies in the proper sense of the word. By the way, there is another Spanish judge here in the tribunal of me who's an expert in these things. She wrote a very interesting doctoral dissertation on paraphilias.
What would you call it? Of what?
Paraphilias, so meaning sexual deviances, right?
Yeah.
And how they affect the validity of marriage. And I mean, that is indeed a dark world. That's not something for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But it's real, and that's the world I deal with. So there are cases of people who have psychological problems that may make it, of course, say if a miracle happens, because the Lord is almighty, but miracles are miracles because they don't happen every day, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't call them miracles. We wouldn't call them your Tuesday morning, right?
Yeah.
So there are cases in which men feel compelled to go with prostitutes. Those things happen, right? There are cases of people who are so deeply hurt inside, who have these deep problems that despite their best efforts, they cannot stop doing some things. I mean, and the same that happens with serial killers, right, or serial rapists, right?
I just need a problem, doctor, comes with this. I mean, and I think we get numb to it. We see these and then we start coming in and now, that's an exception. There should be two in this. So we come down to the average everyday guy that really doesn't have these deep pathologies, but it can say, oh, well, yeah, we approved one about this and maybe this one, maybe that's a pathology. I think that's where the frustration comes and
yes.
And things are approved there shouldn't be. Let me kind of change the direction, but not really. Is that, do you notice, at least from your tribunal, or do you guys ever talk to people from other dioceses, tribunals, find that any of the members of the tribunals, judges, whatever, are saying, too many are approved. Let's go figure out how we can reassess. Do we ever get that? Because we do become numb to what we're seeing and going, something's not right. Does that ever happen?
I think this links back to what I was saying before. What, to me, the thought crosses my mind. I am the administrator of the tribunal. I look at the stats. I've been looking at stats these last 2 years more than my whole life before. But to me, the answer, the good answer is we need to look at the actual case. Okay, so study very well the law, study very well what our betters do. So we have a monthly Rotal jurisprudence study here at our tribunal, and that's something very common. But in the end, it shouldn't be about stats, right? It shouldn't be, I guess you're right. About, hey, we're giving too many annulments. Well, if all cases are cases in which we have reached moral certainty that this marriage was invalid, our duty is to declare that they were invalid. Otherwise, no. And I understand the struggle. Yeah. I am very afraid of getting used to this. Like doctors who operate, and I'm used to people dying in my hands, right? Or children who are forced to be soldiers and they kill people, and so they are numb to murder. I want to be very careful with not getting used to this, because I am very much aware that the lives of people are in my hands, right? That the lives of people, because let's be honest, I know for some people, they don't really care very much about this, right? We even have some parties who are not Catholic, right? We have parties who are doing this for so that their they can Catholic marry a spouses. Catholic, right? Exactly. Yeah. But there are people with very delicate conscience, right? That they come to us and they say, if you don't declare the nullity of my marriage, I am not going to date. I'm going to remain faithful to my true wife or my true husband, right? And those people deserve the best of us. Those people deserve that
They're
we
going to
take
be
very
right up here in heaven.
seriously.
They're going to be on the highest levels of heaven.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And I mean, I am very much aware that I'm a sinner and that I am a poor sinner. So I pray to God to, there is this verse, I think it's in the Psalms, right? Oh Lord, absolve me of what I don't see, of what is occult to me, right? Those sins that I am not aware, these are the worst. Maybe I am hurting people around me and I am not aware. The others are easier because at least I can ask for forgiveness for those, right? And I hope that I have not hurt people with my decisions. I hope that I have not failed on either side, right? Like declaring the nullity of marriages that were not invalid, that's putting people in occasion of sin. And or the contrary, right? That I have been too stern a judge and insisted in not seeing the nullity of a marriage of someone who wants to start a new life and in all rightfulness because their first marriage was invalid. So yeah.
I hope that all the people on tribunals are like you, because at least if you think
no, they are better than me.
In this, if everybody in that tribunal cares about their conscience and about facing God and about being as discerning, that's what I want. So yeah, you're a sinner, saved by grace. I get it. But I would feel better if I thought that everybody cared this much, because there's this impression from people in my business that it is a rubber stamp, that it isn't. It's like the assumption goes in, it's going to be approved, and rarely are you going to find one that goes, oh, this one, no. It just, it's going to be approved unless some really rare thing comes out that says, no, you're validly married, your spouse just paid someone to write up the papers and nothing's true. We can go back to what our Blessed Mother said to Lucia, I should say, in Fatima. And then she spoke to Pope John Paul II, and he was very much troubled. And so the quote from Cardinal Caffarra, who had spoken to, John Paul, was that the final battle between God and the Antichrist would be for marriage and the family. And we see that. We see how Satan wants to attack marriage. He wants to attack the tribunals. He wants to attack the church. He wants to attack the children. And I think that will help us understand why it ramped up in the 60s, because when she appeared, this was 1917, we got to do our part. I think most people watching this need to pay attention to the fact that Satan is fighting for our marriages, and do your part in not even getting into the tribunal. And do your part in not even getting divorced as best as you can. Do your part, and even when your spouse says, I hate you and I never loved you, don't move on and give up. Turn to God and say, well, I'm going to fight. I think more people should have more courage. More people should fight. More people should say, no, I'm not. It's not me against my spouse. It's me against Satan. And we're not going to let him win.
Amen.
I think that's what we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's beautiful what you just said.
Well, I didn't say it because, Our Lady said it too. But
it's true. And I mean, look, my grandma, God rest her soul, La Abuela Charito, she had a character. And she had some sentences, apodictic ones. Like, back in the day when people didn't choose their partner, people were happier.
There actually is research. I want to go to India. Research. We have love marriages. So it's called love marriages or arranged marriages, right? So love marriages, you choose your spouse. Arranged marriages, you don't. Research has shown that people in arranged marriages are happier than those in love marriages, because perhaps they go in with proper expectations, right? That, okay, this is something I have to work at. And there's an Asian phrase, I don't remember if it's Japanese or Chinese or what, but I know it's an Asian phrase that says, Western marriages start out hot and end up cold, and Asian marriages start out cold and end up hot. So it's really all about the act of loving, the act of understanding. I think that's the biggest thing, is if we understand what love is, that means in our marriages, we're going to fight even when our spouse is having an affair. We're going to fight even when our spouse is addicted to a drug. We're going to fight even when our spouse says he's a woman, but he's still a man. We're going to fight.
Yeah.
And that is where we get the grace. Because I'm going to do a video tomorrow, maybe tonight if I have time. It talks about we are, especially Westerners, we want to run from suffering. Comfort is deadly. We need to learn how to carry our cross. We need to know how to embrace suffering. And that includes if our spouse leaves us. And that includes even if your spouse gets a valid annulment, you can still choose to keep standing for that marriage. You can choose to say, well, I'm going to still love regardless of what this document says, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So I think.
Yeah. Final wise words, my doctor friend.
So if someone is watching and they are discerning whether to get married or not, right? Because that's the problem today, right? You made the point very well. True. So we live in a society that doesn't help. Correct. So marriage is mocked in movies, in TV, right? Fidelity is despised. So that's a big problem because traditionally marriage has been, as I don't know, a man would get married, and that's so a 35-year-old unmarried man would be suspicious in the 50s. So what's going on here? Why aren't you married, right?
Yeah.
Today is the other way around. So it's not going to help. You need even more strength than back in the day. What I would say, what we need is virtue, right? As I was going to quote my grandma again, right? Don't marry the one you are super in love with. Marry the one who's she used to say a good person, right?
Who's going to be a good spouse?
But a good person in the classical sense of someone who has virtues, someone who has humility, fortitude, wisdom, temperance, someone who embodies virtue, because you're going to have to fight so much, right? Someone who has, of course, the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. That's what you really need for your marriage to succeed. You don't need someone who's super popular. You don't need someone who's super hot. What you need is someone who's gonna come home tired from work and still gonna have time, still is going to have time to play with the kids. You need someone who in the middle of an argument is gonna say, you know what, you're right, I'm sorry. Someone who's gonna have the maturity to come and speak with you in a calm, soothing voice after you guys had an argument. Someone who's going to be able to forgive and ask for forgiveness, right? Someone who's going to know how to help. Someone who's going to be not so focused in their own feelings and needs and narcissistic ideations that they are not going to be paying attention to you. Someone who's going to make you be a better person, and someone who wants to grow and someone who wants to become better. And know for sure you're going to have to suffer. Okay, marriage is blessed with the sign of the cross. And as we say in the joke, oh, he married, yeah, against whom, right? Because marriage is that thing. You're gonna become at some point your worst enemies, right? But as a Spaniard, I gotta say, right, for marriage to work, you gotta be like that conquistador that burned the ships. So if you get into marriage thinking that divorce is an option, you're most likely going to end up divorced.
You're doomed.
Okay. So divorce cannot be even spoken about. I mean, if you want this, go ahead. Otherwise, you most likely are going to fail. So it's going to be, that is not an option for me. You got to burn the ships and then fight to death. Fight to death. There is a beautiful quote from the Orthodox tradition of the monks, right? I read the book Saint Silouan the Atonite, so from Mount Athos, right? Saint Silouan would say that the monk goes into that spiritual journey and reaches a point where the devil says, if you keep doing that, you will die. And then the monk says, then I will die. That's what you need for marriage. You know, if you keep doing it, well, I will, because this is my way of loving, right? It's a crucified love. The same way as Christ, who's the perfect spouse of the church, who's the perfect image of the bride, right, dies and bleeds until death for his
Yes.
beloved bride. That's what we are called to, right? To give everything we have and to die trying.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful because all of us think marriage is going to be easy. If I could give people one tip, as someone who's been married almost 42 years, is that even the super, I wrote my book happens to be right here, right? The super couple, these extremely happily married, these are the cream of the crop. I interviewed them. And so when you realize even they have struggles, what you have to understand is marriage, and we'll make this kind of the end. But if I want to attach my two arms to each other, I can't unless I cut them. And then they have to scar together. If you want, you cut your skin, it has to be cut in order to scar together and scar stronger. My job as a spouse is to rub off my husband's rough edges and to create that cut. And he's got to rub off mine. And that's painful. So if we go into marriage assuming it's going to be this without any pain, then we've got a problem. So if my job, maybe your job too, maybe all of ours, is to give you right expectations going into marriage, that it's going to hurt. The good stuff's going to come past. You're going to go through a phase where you say, oh, is this what marriage really is? Then you can go on and go, all right, let's work with what we have and let's make it even better. So we've talked way longer than I talk with most people, but I've enjoyed it. Let me do how I always do it. Name one thing you'd have our viewers do differently as a result of something we talked about today.
Say that again.
Name one thing you would have our viewers do differently. Give them you're giving them homework. What should they do differently? Give them an action as a result of something we talked about today.
I hope we all listen more, starting with me.
Amen. I'm right there. I'm right there. Again, if you guys want to find Dr. Menendez, he's got a YouTube channel, and it is, I will click the link right below. It's I think it's just plain old Dr. Menendez. Yes. And as soon as he has opened his website, I will be notified by him, and I will go ahead into the show, even if it's 3 months from now, and I will add that to the link. So if you want to get a hold of him, go to his YouTube page, write a comment in one of his videos. But he has a lot of videos on annulment and marriage, and just so you can understand, go into marriage prepared. If you want to follow me, go to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, which is now known as X, which is stupid, and Rumble, and all the things. Just go to the places and you'll find me. Sign up for my newsletter. Look up for information coming for the Truth Speakers Conference coming up October 11th of this year. So truthspeakers.org. But to find me and get all this information in one spot, breakfastwithbacon.com. So that's my one-stop shop. You can get everything there. If you do have a marriage and that's falling apart or has fallen apart and you want to become one of my sacred standards, you can also get me at breakfastwithbacon.com, and I'm going to guide you to sacredstandards.org, where you're going to be in a very tight, very private, closed community where no one else is going to know, because we talk about some intimate stuff. But we are there. We are the community that will lift you up, whether you've been the victim of divorce or annulment or infidelity or just whatever, and you want to fight for your marriage. That community is a holy community of men and women who are saying, no matter what, I'm married till death, and I'm going to just live my life for God and be the best spouse I can be, even if I have to walk this journey alone. I think I've done enough talking, so we have to bring this to an end. Okay, now I'm going to test, because he's a doctor and he's super smart. So see if he remembers how we're supposed to end this, okay? Telepathic. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life
with the sunny side up.
Yes, he did it.